During World War II, German submarines sank thousands of Allied ships. U-boats were so successful, many thought they could win the war, until the Allies launched an all-out effort to destroy them. 2 out of 3 U-boats would perish. 4 out of 5 U-boat sailors were killed. Yet, there was no shortage of volunteers to go to war in the Iron Coffin. Meet the sailors who manned the U-boats, next on Suicide Missions. Unterseeboot, shortened simply to U-boat, was the German word for submarine. They had once ruled the seas, but by the middle of the Second World War, the men who sailed the U-boats knew they were closer to the ocean bottom than they were to their home port. The ferocious Allied offensive against the U-boats had made them obsolete fighting machines. For most U-boat sailors, 1,000 miles from shore inside a steel tube, it was just a matter of time before their U-boats were found and destroyed.
At the beginning of the war, you didn't have the feeling that it really would get you. You said, they won't get me, they won't get us. Later on in the war, you knew that you were taking a terrible risk the minute you left port.
The number of my classmates was, at the beginning of the war, round about 450. And around about 230 lost their life in the war. And you can imagine what it means.
I was operating in the Atlantic when I heard that the center of the submarines was asking for my best friend Anders. He didn't answer. Then I knew that, that he was lost. And that was a great loss to me personally. And so I felt absolutely alone now.
By 1943, the U-boat had become the target of thousands of Allied aircraft and warships, all set on the U-boat's destruction.
When you hit, you're dead. The boat is broken to pieces. But if a depth charge is very close, then many things aboard the boat happen. The lights go out, the bulbs break, and there's water coming in here, and everyone is doing something to repair damage. And this is a little bit frightful situation. And when the boat goes down to depths that normally is not your diving depth, the next second something happens and you are dead.
The fierceness of the Allied campaign against the U-boat was a result of the submarine's initial success. 1939 to 1942 were the glory years for the U-boats and the elite force of volunteers who sailed them. Brass bands played when they departed for patrol. Pretty young women welcomed them home. Stories of their successes were broadcast to a proud German public.
Täglich steuern neue Heimkehrer ihre Stützpunkte an. Alle führen stolze Zeichen des Erfolges.
And in this case, the propaganda was true. The U-boats were the most feared fighting ships in the war.
Merchant sailors lived in constant fear they were going to be torpedoed. And if you're in the Atlantic, the North Atlantic, even in summertime, water temperature is 50 degrees. A few hours in that, you're dead. They slept with their clothes on. The lifeboats were always rigged and ready to go with food, flares, and water. It was a very difficult period.
The U-boats left their heavily defended home ports in the Mediterranean and North Seas, as well as the coast of France, and prowled the ocean for their prey. Merchant ships carrying war supplies to Germany's enemy, the English. The merchant ships came from the United States, Canada, and South America. In an attempt to protect themselves, the merchant ships gathered and crossed the Atlantic in large groups known as convoys, which were escorted and guarded by destroyers. But U-boats employed a tactic called the wolf pack that was devastatingly effective. The U-boats spread out in great lines across the ocean. When one U-boat spotted a convoy, it held its fire and radioed the others. Once the others had gathered, they attacked as a pack.
My first patrol as captain of the boat, we were positioned in a line of 40 subs. I was on the northern part of the line, and the convoy was detected by the southern boat. I dived and get the bearing of the convoy by sonar. I could sink two ships in this convoy. I could see the parts of the boat thrown up in the air.
Initially, the wolf packs were unstoppable. For the men inside the U-boats, sinking British ships began to take on a routine. Each U-boat was identified, not by a name like U.S. subs, but by a number. Volkmar Koenig was a midshipman on U-99.
With warships, with battleships or submarines where you send torpedoes to another target, it's completely impersonal. You think of the ship and you think of the merchant ship you want to sink, and you don't think of the poor people that perhaps have to jump into the water from a burning tanker into the burning oil. Yeah? You don't think of that. It's just something you are trained for, and you do more or less as a routine work. To a sailor on a battleship, there was a mean way of doing warfare. They sneak around here somewhere underneath, and they should come and stand it, and we shoot it out.
Some convoy battles were over in hours. Some would take days.
Generally, they would try to attack at night. Some of the U-boats would scatter around the convoy and fire from outside. Some of the guys would deliberately get inside the convoy to where it was almost impossible to attack him. The method of attack depended on the particular skipper.
The existence of such deadly submarines in the early years of World War II, 1939 and 1940, had caught the British off guard. 2 decades earlier, at the end of World War I, Germany had been forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles. Among its many restrictions was the outlawing of German U-boats because of their effectiveness during the First World War. But the German Navy began to violate the agreement just 3 years after it was signed. They secretly purchased a Dutch submarine building firm and began constructing U-boats for other countries. The goal was to ensure that the German Navy stayed on the cutting edge of submarine design. By 1932, Germany was openly building U-boats in direct violation of the treaty. In September of 1935, Adolf Hitler tapped former World War I U-boat captain Karl Dönitz to command